The purpose of this guide is to provide universities with hands-on specific information about what to include in their accreditation submission and how this can be structured, recognising that Speech Pathology Australia are open to universities adopting a flexible range of approaches in their preparation of accreditation documentation. First, an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of lands, seas and waters throughout Australia and pay respect to elders past, present and future. We recognise that the health and social and emotional well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are grounded in continued connection to culture, country, language and community, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. When preparing for accreditation, there are a few important first steps to consider each time. For new programs, it is in your best interest to contact Speech Pathology Australia early in your planning for accreditation to clarify requirements and maximise opportunities for advice as you start to develop your documentation. And for continuing programs, it's also in your best interest to contact Speech Pathology Australia to clarify timelines and in particular dates for submission of documentation and site visit. As you begin your documentation, ensure speech pathology staff in your program are aware of the accreditation requirements and their role in both preparation of documentation and the site visit. As part of this, ensure that staff have accessed parts 1 to 3 of the accreditation guidelines and engaged with the relevant video guides. In particular, it is helpful for staff to understand key concepts relating to accreditation in alignment with the professional standards. These are highlighted in Video Guide 2 and later in this guide. Lastly, it's important to recognise that in order to be accredited, your curriculum must align with the professional standards. Accordingly, universities should be keeping the professional standards at the forefront of their minds as they develop curriculum and assessment tasks. We'll now discuss the contents of your submission. The narrative is your opportunity to tell a story that describes how your program supports and assesses students as ready for entry to the profession. It effectively sets the scene and provides accreditors with an initial understanding of the program. No two narratives are the same, and this is your opportunity to highlight what you believe are key areas of difference for your program, key strengths, and how the program fits into the context of your university and broader professional community. You'll note there are some minimum inclusion requirements that must be presented within your narrative, which can be found on pages 6 to 7 of Part 2. The story you tell about your program is then further supported by your provision of specific and detailed evidence, such as your assessment mapping, subject outlines, and practice education manuals. Here are 2 brief examples of how a program might tell a story relating to these key concepts, and will draw your attention to a couple of important points. Firstly, please note that these examples are necessarily short and not meant to reflect a comprehensive response. That aside, as per the examples, narratives are best provided in first-person voice and should be concise, yet still tell a story. You'll also note that the final point in each of these examples directs the reader to where specific evidence can be found within the documentation, which assists accreditors in both navigating and synthesizing your claims. Having discussed the concept of the narrative, we'd like to draw your attention to a number of key concepts that will feature within your narrative, as well as elsewhere within your submission, in the form of supporting evidence. You'll note that all of these concepts are reflective of the intent and focus of the professional standards in recognising the breadth of speech pathology practice roles and contexts. You'll also note that each of these concepts relate to multiple, sometimes overlapping accreditation criteria. Our intention is not to speak to individual criteria, but to enable a broader understanding of the implications of these concepts for accreditation. Many of these concepts are discussed on pages 10 to 13 of the Part 2 Evidence Guide. Speech Pathology Australia's actions emphasise to the speech pathology profession and the broader community our commitment to culturally safe and responsive practice with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and communities. Accordingly, the 3 domains of the professional standards and the accreditation guidelines reflect this commitment through a focus on practices required to improve outcomes with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and communities. The accreditation standards require each university program to provide evidence of how they are facilitating the development of staff and students' culturally safe and responsive speech pathology practice with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and communities in accordance with the professional standards. Partnership and engagement with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and communities are central to all aspects of governance, students, and curriculum. The professional standards acknowledge the breadth of culturally diverse contexts in which speech pathologists work. Accordingly, the accreditation standards require programs to demonstrate students' knowledge and skills that support them to practice in such contexts. Criterion 27 reflects this commitment, with universities required to demonstrate how the program embeds learning experiences that support students to provide person-centred, family-centred and community-centred approaches that respect culture, language and diversity, and that such experiences are assessed. Communication and swallowing are defined in the professional standards and reflected in the accreditation standards Part 2 evidence guide on page 11. There are 2 specific criteria that relate to coverage of communication and swallowing within your program curriculum. Your accreditation submission must document, firstly, how students are taught the theoretical constructs that underpin practice with individuals and communities across the lifespan relating to all components of communication and swallowing in Criterion 22, and then map how your program assesses students at a whole of cohort, must-pass level at a standard appropriate for entry to the profession within these areas across the lifespan in Criterion 23. Evidence to support Criterion 23 will include Template 6 and inclusion of information within the narrative. Please note that whole of cohort assessments are those whereby all students experience the same assessment content and delivery and are assessed against the same marking criteria or rubric as their peers. Whole of cohort assessment supports equity, moderation and standardisation, providing stronger accreditation evidence than assessments that vary in content and or delivery and or moderation, or where the assessment has elements of individualisation. The term must pass refers to assessments which must be passed to pass the unit or subject or to progress in the program. Must-pass assessments provide a level of assurance that all students who pass the assessment have demonstrated the knowledge, skills, or attributes being assessed. The professional standards specify the competencies required for speech pathology students and qualified speech pathologists to work in the areas of communication and swallowing across the lifespan. Graduating students are not expected to possess the same breadth of knowledge, skills, and attributes as more experienced speech pathologists. Programs are required to demonstrate that their students upon graduation are ready to enter the profession. Page 12 of the Part 2 Evidence Guide details characteristics of a student who is ready for entry to the profession. Universities are not expected to document how each individual point has been met. However, accreditors should be able to establish that students demonstrate such readiness when considering the range of evidence provided by universities. This evidence will be provided in addressing a range of criteria, and universities should take the opportunity to describe in their narrative how such evidence is integrated to provide assurance of readiness to practice. For example, a university may provide this assurance through integrated evidence of comprehensive teaching of communication and swallowing across the lifespan, specified whole of cohort must-pass assessments within the academic program, which are assessed at a standard suitable for entry to the profession, specified practice education experiences across the lifespan at near entry or entry level, consideration of transfer of knowledge and skill from other key academic assessments and practice education experiences in areas of communication and swallowing. The merit of all evidence submitted by universities is considered by accreditors. Template 6 and 7 present critical evidence, particularly in relation to criteria 22 and 23, and should therefore be positioned in an easy-to-access location within your documents and signposted where relevant. These two templates have been separated, not because one is more important than the other, but because they provide different information. They assist accreditors in understanding two key features of your program. Template 6 tells accreditors where they can find your assessments, which are must pass, whole of cohort, and at a level consistent with readiness to enter the profession. These must pass whole of cohort assessments are just one piece of your broader program puzzle. Accordingly, when considering the design of a program, universities should not consider Template 6 as a foundation for mapping and developing assessment tasks. Other assessments that contribute to core claims of competency development for students are also important, and Template 7 captures these. This template is important because it's recognised that students develop skills iteratively over time, and that transfer supports them to build skills and knowledge. Assessment at different stages of a program and using a range of different assessments is therefore considered important. Another key point to note is that accreditors will be seeking information within the narrative or elsewhere about how the assessments outlined in Templates 6 and 7 combine and integrate to assist students to develop and demonstrate the knowledge and skills required for readiness to enter the profession. This provides accreditors with the specific information they need to understand your program and its assurances of student competency. Transfer in the context of student learning can be described as the capacity to apply knowledge and skills learnt in one context to a different context, and is described on pages 12 to 13 of the Part 2 Evidence Guide. Speech Pathology Australia recognises that the ability to transfer knowledge and skills is critical for new graduates, and indeed throughout one's professional career. Universities will discuss the notion of transfer within their narrative and in response to Criterion 24. A student who is able to transfer knowledge and skills demonstrates the characteristics listed on this slide. It is recognised that programs cannot include a whole of cohort entry-level assessment for all areas of communication and swallowing across the lifespan, and nor can practice education experiences assure this. Therefore, all universities will need some reliance on claims of transfer within their programs from other assessments. Your narrative should provide an integrated overview of how your students demonstrate characteristics of transfer. It is important that universities are explicit within documentation about where claims of transfer are made for specific areas of communication and swallowing. We draw your attention to Template 7 here, which outlines your assessments that contribute to core claims of competency, but not at a level appropriate for entry to the profession. Such assessments typically form part of your argument for assurance of competency. As an example, you may not have a whole of cohort must-pass assessment at a standard suitable for entry to the profession in a specific area of communication. However, you provide evidence to support a claim of transfer, which might include the following: teaching related to the specific area of communication, academic whole of cohort must-pass assessments at a standard suitable for entry to the profession in other areas of communication, entry-level competency on Compass or alternative prior to graduation, specific attention on transfer of knowledge and skills throughout the curriculum with specific examples relevant to the specified area of communication, academic assessments in that specified area of communication at a level lower than entry to the profession, practice education experiences in the specified area of communication at less than entry level, and other relevant evidence. Overall, the validity of your claims for transfer will be influenced by a range of factors. This will be discussed further in Video Guide 5 regarding what accreditors are looking for. It's important for programs to provide clear information about their practice education curriculum, including the pedagogical framework that underpins its delivery. In addition, the following is relevant evidence: a summary of the practice education curriculum, including duration of placements, supervision models, service delivery models, range and timing of practice education experiences. A copy of the information given to students and practice educators about placements for each year and about passing criteria for each placement. A description of training resources for practice educators. A copy of any log or placement record sheet used by the students or university staff, including any summary of hours. This is further explained on page 8 of the Part 2 Evidence Guide and addressed in criteria 29 to 34. Please note that Speech Pathology Australia continues to accept the use of Compass as a tool to provide evidence of speech pathology competency development in placement contexts. However, it is not mandated. Alternative tools are also acceptable. However, in such cases, your documentation should detail the rationale for the tool's use and its validity as an assessment tool. It is important to note that Compass uses the terminology entry level. Students' achievement of entry level on Compass is one indicator of their readiness to enter the profession. You are directed to the description of entry to the profession on page 12 of Part 2. The professional standards recognises that the client a speech pathologist works with may be an individual, a family, or a community, or the individual in the context of their family or community. In keeping with this broader client focus, the professional standards also recognises the breadth of service provision required to appropriately support individuals, families, and communities. For example, an increased emphasis on prevention and promotion and systems change. Therefore, the accreditation standards require programs to demonstrate that students are taught and assessed within both academic and practice education curricula on their capacity to provide services that meet the needs of the broader client. Criteria 33 and 39 reflect this requirement. The professional standards recognise that speech pathologists undertake a diverse range of roles, and as part of these roles incorporate a variety of service delivery approaches. For example, telepractice is recognised as an effective service delivery approach employed by speech pathologists in a range of contexts. Accreditation standards require programs to provide evidence of enabling students to experience a range of service delivery approaches and roles in order to facilitate person-centred, family-centred, and community-centred care. We will now move to the preparation of your submission. Speech Pathology Australia recognises the value of different presentation styles, so it's important to note that your accreditation submission can include a range of styles and formats. For example, you may wish to present part of your narrative in a video format, supplemented by PowerPoint slides, or add an audio recording to emphasise particular components. Tables, figures, and other graphical representations such as concept maps and the like are also welcome. Please note that templates 1 to 8 are mandatory, as are subject or unit outlines. When preparing for accreditation, keep in mind that your reader does not understand your program like you do. Therefore, be clear and specific. Don't make assumptions. Tell the reader exactly what you want them to know and where they can find key supporting information. Accreditors understand that all programs have areas of strength and areas to improve in. Ensure that you are reflective of both your strengths, your required improvements, and any foreseeable changes. Speech Pathology Australia requires each program seeking to be accredited to provide detailed documentation that reports against the Speech Pathology Australia accreditation standards. Submitted documentation must be coherent, concise, accurate, and appropriately detailed to enable the accreditation panel to develop evidence-informed views of the presented program. Speech Pathology Australia's intention is not to be prescriptive regarding the order of presented information. However, common approaches share the following features. The narrative, including an executive summary, appears first. If there are 2 programs, there is 1 document for each with main information. Subject unit outlines are provided in a separate volume with hyperlinks. When formatting your submission, there are some key considerations to follow which will make both your preparation and the accreditor's review more efficient. Speech Pathology Australia require 5 hard copies of the documentation, as well as an electronic copy that can be accessed by each member of the panel. The electronic copy may be in the form of USBs, SharePoint, or alternative form. A comprehensive table of contents is required to assist reader navigation. It's helpful to clearly delineate sections of your document with headings and subheadings as required. Insert page numbers on your document, and you may wish to provide tabs or document dividers which can assist accreditors in rapidly finding key sections of your document, such as practice education information, assessment mapping, and appendices. As indicated earlier, providing subject or unit outlines in a separate volume is a common approach that works well, as does cross-referencing of information throughout your documentation. For example, when describing in the narrative how the program teaches and assesses swallowing across the lifespan, cross-referencing to templates 6 and 7, including page numbers and any other supporting information such as subject or unit outlines, will help accreditors synthesize all evidence. Including hyperlinks in your electronic copies where relevant is also recommended. Lastly, just a reminder that completion of templates 1 to 8 is mandatory. Please place these templates at relevant positions within your documentation to provide the most cohesion rather than grouping them as a discrete section of all templates. Please also refer to the other accreditation video guides available.